Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Welcome to the month of August. I cannot believe this. So, I'm really glad you're joining us today. We have done a lot of podcasts on internal investigations, but a couple things have hit me recently that I really want to make sure you all are focused on. So today we're going to talk about some important insights for workplace investigators. So we all know that conducting investigations can be tricky. I think I've told you guys before, I've met some people who have commented to me things like, oh, well, I decided that litigation was too stressful, so now I do internal investigations. And I just find that so interesting because I think investigations are very challenging. And the pressure is on. In a litigation, when you're doing a deposition, for example, okay, you mess up a deposition, you keep it open, and you do it again. Like, you can always do this. In an investigation, you really have to get your interviews right the first time. Now, you may need to do a follow-up interview, but you're going to get the best, most unfiltered information in that very first interview you do. So you've got to be on. You've got to know your stuff. You've got to be prepared. There's no way to wing it when you're doing an investigation. So we've had some situations recently with clients where internal investigators, either investigators from the client who work in the HR department or investigators from third parties, have really made some boo-boos. And I want to make sure that you don't make those boo-boos. So we're going to talk about them here today. The first thing is actually a mistake I made. And I want you to always remember that you might be being recorded, even when you are not recording the interview. So I did an investigation for someone, for a large employer years ago, early in my career. And I really liked the witness who I was talking to. So I got a little bit casual with her. And I ended up telling her about another investigation I had done, not anything to do with the employer, just something interesting that had come up. And I didn't honestly think a thing about it. I would never do that now, but I thought I'm just connecting with this person, right? So this is a good thing. Well, she immediately went to her boss in HR after we finished the interview and said, something's wrong with this investigator. She was talking about another investigation. I don't think she had the appropriate level of confidentiality. And I never got hired by them again. And to this day, I am mortified. I didn't reveal anything I shouldn't have revealed. I didn't do anything like that. But if I had just had in my mind, she might be recording me. In other words, the contents of this conversation could actually be relayed to someone else. I would have been much more careful. Now, I tell you that, and some of you are thinking right now, oh my gosh, she's an idiot. Like, how could she do that? You know how it is when you connect with someone and then you feel overly comfortable with them? Like I said, it would never happen now that I've done hundreds of investigations, but that was very early in my career and I just made a mistake. And guess what? We all make mistakes. But if you pretend that everything you were saying to that person could come out somewhere, and that you might be being recorded, but even if you're not recorded, somebody may relay that conversation, you will be more careful. And that's what you need to do. You need to be 100% perfect when you are doing these interviews in terms of your demeanor, the questions you're asking, the information you're sharing. You are in control of that, and you've got to make sure you're doing it correctly. Now, that rolls right into my second insight that I want you to remember is I don't want you to be overly solicitous with the witness, overly kind, overly chatty. You heard what happened when I did that. But also, I don't want you to be too tough. You're not a prosecutor. You're not trying to catch someone in a lie. You are an independent investigator. And you need to keep a calm, cool demeanor no matter what you're hearing, no matter what you're thinking, no matter how much you think the witness may or may not be telling you the truth. You've got to go into it really, really neutral. Now, you're a human being. You're gonna reach decisions about people. You're gonna sometimes reach contrary decisions in the same interview, right? Or opinions. So you think in the beginning they're telling you the truth and by the end you don't, or vice versa. That's human. That's part of your job as an investigator. But you can't go in trying to be too tough or thinking that, well, if I'm really overly nice to them, maybe I'll get some information that I need. Be the independent investigator you have been retained to be. Whether you're an external investigator or an internal investigator, you have to uphold the professionalism and the integrity of this position, of this assignment. And the way you do that is not being overly kind, but also not being overly challenging or difficult. Are you going to have to ask tough questions? You bet. I had a situation recently where we did an investigation for an employer, I don't know, a year and a half ago. I didn't substantiate any of the allegations. Now the employee has come back and she wants them to do another investigation. And they said, okay, I want you to do it, Jen. I said, okay, I'm happy to. Well, guess who wasn't happy? The person who I had said that her allegations weren't substantiated, right? The complainant didn't want me to do it. And the employer said, you know what? You're the best person to do it. I don't want somebody to have to go learn or have to gather up facts that you've already gathered. So you're not going to have to relearn anything. So you're going to do it. The person wasn't happy. Okay, but I had to behave exactly the same way as if I didn't have that piece of information. And I know some of you might think that's really easy. I'm one of those people who wear my emotions on my sleeves. It's harder for me. So I have to make a really concerted effort to be very direct, but also very professional, not be too chatty, not be too tough. There's a balance that I have to strike. And we all have our different approaches. We have different personalities, different ways of conducting investigation interviews. That's fine. I'm not saying everybody has to do it the same. Just know that when you leave that interview, you can say to yourself, I was impartial. I was professional. I listened to the information. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't sigh. I didn't do anything that would give that witness any indication in terms of whether I believe them or not. That's always how you want to leave. So when somebody says to you at the end of an interview, how'd I do? Do you believe me? And people will do that. I get that all the time. I like it when they ask because that means I didn't give them a hint. They don't know where they stand with me. And of course, I don't answer the question, but I want them to not know where they stand, right? I'm not reaching any decisions based on what they've told me. I have to do the full investigation before I reach any decision. The third insight I want to provide to you are your written reports. One of the things we've noticed is a lot of training out there on how to conduct investigations doesn't really do much at all in terms of writing reports. We actually have a 3-day workshop that we do twice a year on investigations is coming up this fall. And it's actually a full day is going to be dedicated to writing report. The first day of the training is October 3rd. It's very limited space because it's very interactive, but we do have a few spots left if you go on the website. We spend a whole day on writing the report because writing the report is the most important thing you will do. Here's why I'm saying that. You could do a really thorough, really impartial, really effective investigation. But if you don't have a way to communicate your findings and your process in a way that makes sense to somebody who wasn't involved, you're not going to be able to show that you did such a great investigation. Now, there is a trend these days with people who want verbal reports. They want short form reports. I get it. It makes perfect sense. Not everybody needs a 50-page report. That costs money. It takes time. But even when you're doing a short report, even when you're doing a verbal report, you need to keep an outline of what you told the person, what you told the client, what were your findings. Even though you're not sending them something in writing, you need to keep something in writing. because that report, whether it's verbal or written, is going to be used to evaluate your investigation. So I was once, this was ages ago, probably 25 years ago, I was doing a litigation and I had to interview an HR director about an investigation she had conducted. And we talked about the investigation and I said, well, do you have any notes? And she said, oh, yeah, hold on. So she digs through this giant bag, which I guess was her work bag, pulls out, I'm not kidding, a napkin from Southwest Airlines where she had written in really teeny weeny print a bunch of notes. Those were her notes. I said, why did you write this on a napkin? Well, when I got to interview the person, I didn't have any paper, but I had a napkin from my flight. So I just wrote it on the napkin. And literally, she opened the napkin and there were notes written everywhere. Okay, great. But that didn't give me a lot of confidence in her investigation. Like, you didn't go ready with paper or your laptop. How do I know what questions you asked? Like, it just wasn't putting her best foot forward. Now, she was a great investigator. It turned out we got the information we needed. We were able to actually get the case dismissed. So that's fabulous. But not having a well-written report created a lot of extra effort for me, which ended up costing the client money and time. So your report is really the bellwether of your investigation, right? If you don't have decent notes or you don't have a decent outline of what you provided in that verbal report, or you don't have something in writing that makes sense, then you haven't done your job as an investigator. So your reports are critical. Again, I don't care if they're in writing. I don't care if they're verbal, but you have to be able to show how you reached the conclusions that you reached and why you are recommending, for example, if you're asked for recommendations, why you're recommending a certain course of action. Okay? Now, the fourth insight I want you to remember is you have to be consistent. A lot of people confuse consistency with doing something the same way every time. Every investigation is different. Every party is different. Every witness is different. Every fact pattern is different. Every set of documentation you get will be different. But what is your general process? In other words, do you type your notes? Do you write your notes and then put them into the computer later? Do you do Zoom interviews or not? Or online interviews, right? Do you cite to the documents in the report, or do you have a separate index, for example, of the exhibits to your report? What is your process? How do you prepare for your investigation? How do you review documents? Do you bait stamp them with numbers so you can keep track of them? Do you not? All of this process and procedure is important because it shows you know what you're doing. It shows you have a methodology. You have a plan. You know how to conduct this investigation. Not that you won't have curveballs thrown at you, right? But this idea that this is how I approach it. I first look at all my documents. Then I prepare my draft allegations. Then I interview my complainant, unless there is no complainant. Maybe I'm doing an administrative inquiry where there's no one who's complained except it's been brought up by management. Well, maybe I'm going to interview the respondent. Okay, great. That's fine. How do I do that? What are the standard questions I ask? What does my report look like? What do I put in my background as opposed to my allegations? How do I support my factual findings? All of these things are process. And if you have a process that you follow, then you know you always followed that process. So when somebody says in a deposition, did you review the documents before you interviewed Walt? Well, yes, I did. Well, how do you know that? Because I do that every time. I do that every time. And by the way, my outline shows where I'm questioning the witness about documents. But your process really makes a difference. Okay? The last insight I want to offer to you is to not let anyone involved in the process get you off track. You may have an interview with somebody's lawyer may be present. Somebody's union representative may be present. Somebody's mother may be present. All right? You may be dealing with difficult people internally, managers who don't want to give you information, employees who act like they haven't seen anything when you know they were present. Don't let any of that get you off track. There are tips, there are tools that you learn and you know the more you do this to help you navigate every single one of those situations. Don't find yourself getting off track. If you keep these insights in mind, you will always do a thorough, good faith, defensible investigation. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. Go out and make it a great day. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.